Well, welcome back to another week's analysis behind the news. I don't know if you've noticed it or not, but we lost two major American aircraft this week in the war in Afghanistan. One was a KC-135 tanker. Those are the big aircraft that fly up and refuel the bombers, refuel the fighters in the midair to give them a longer range capability. The other one was a National Airlines cargo 747 that went in and after takeoff, and it just went like this and then finally straightened out, but landed on its belly into a big fireball. I'm not sure what the cargo was, but everybody on board these aircraft were killed. So that's two big aircraft as a result of this war in 1 week. The Taliban tried to take credit for the 747 that crashed. Whether that's true or not, we don't know. But speaking of aircraft, there's been a disturbing development as far as Russia is concerned. We know, and I mentioned it last week, that through a treaty we allow the Russians to fly over our bases in the United States. This is to monitor, in the name of peace, our preparedness and whether we're getting ready to attack them or they're going to attack us or whatever there is. But one of the things that they've been doing increasingly, this year particularly, is the testing of American defenses around Guam, around Alaska, Northern California, and other places where their bear bombers, that's what they call them, bear, are coming very close to our territory to check our reaction, check our radar, our sensors, that sort of thing. They're also doing it with Sweden. But the Swedish people are really up in arms over this because the Swedish Air Force didn't even bother, like the American Air Force did, to go up and kind of tag along to see what they were doing. That just maybe they might be coming in to bomb something. Now, it's particularly a problem in Sweden because a lot of Americans don't know that back in the early 80s, you may remember that the Russians were sending in submarines into Swedish fjords. Now, they never carried it in the United States newspapers what they were doing, but they were not just testing the Swedish defenses as a result of sending these submarines in. They were dropping Spetsnaz forces, that's like SEALs or special forces of the Russians, into Sweden. To start disarming certain military bases. They destroyed a large amount of Sweden's oil reserves, things like that, is a precursor to and preliminary steps toward invading Sweden under Brezhnev. Brezhnev was really quite a warmonger. You remember, he's the guy that went into Afghanistan. But there was a plan, a very elaborate one, to invade Sweden and another country. That plan fell apart. It was too elaborate. Things went wrong. But I've got this straight from the head of the National Security Agency that that was what was going on back then. Now we're starting to see the same thing happening over and over again. A little bit of belligerency that's not getting out into the general public yet. But, testing our military capabilities. It's a little bit disturbing. All the while, we're supposed to be getting together more with our intelligence convergence in the name of the war on terror. Putin is trying to get Obama to become very much involved with Russia in stopping terrorism together. Well, as those of you who follow these broadcasts know, it's Russian terrorism, it's not Muslim terrorism. That Moscow is still the focal point for terror. Now, by convergence, they can find out our capabilities. Are we on to them? Are these surrogate nations and surrogate groups controlled by Moscow, are they detected yet by our intelligence agencies? Are they on to these various terrorist groups? By cooperating together, they can find that out. And so if our intelligence bureau detects something, then the Russians can tell them, well, wait a minute, you've got to do this instead of that, pull back, just even cancel something if necessary. Any number of different things can be done if you have the intelligence of your enemy. And that's what they're trying to do. Another thing that is a problem in this area for us as citizens is that we have found out now that some of the telephone conversations and emails of these bombers in Boston are readily available. Now, how did that happen? If they were not under surveillance, and apparently this is the case, they were not under surveillance, then they were able to pull up all of these conversations. Well, if they were able to pull up their conversations, they probably can pull up your conversations as well. They not only can do that, now they want to put cameras on every corner and that sort of thing. It won't stop terror if they put cameras up. They can follow the people where they go or prove that they were the ones that performed the terrorist act. But in and of itself, having a camera up at every intersection is not going to stop the terror. It can stop a lot of other things, though. It can be very intimidating to the average citizen. There's one thing that we should never, ever allow, and that is to think in these terms. By giving this power to this individual, would you want to give it to somebody that wanted more power, that didn't agree with you politically? For instance, let's say, well, under Bush. Well, Bush won't misuse it. Will Obama misuse it? Will the next guy misuse it? We should never allow that sort of thing, even if it isn't in the Constitution. We should never allow a situation that could be used to build power in our country. And spying on everybody's telephone calls and having the capability of doing that, I find that a little bit disconcerting. But not to worry, we can save some money as we go along here, because now we're finding out that Obama is going to take day trips. Now, a day trip for you and I are just to get into a car and go on out and visit someplace for a day. We might take along the whole family. We might even pack a picnic basket. We might even fill the tank full of gasoline just in case. Put a little more ready cash into our pocket just in case. Well, when the president does it, it's at least 2 or 3 aircraft, because they've got to make sure that before he gets there, they have the special cars that he's to use that are armored. The Secret Service has to go in and prepare the area just in case. You're talking about a very large entourage and a number of equipment to do that. Costs a lot of money. But he's going to go out and talk about the economy in day trips. $1 million here, $1 million there. It costs a lot of money to do this. And who's he going to talk to? High school students and blue-collar workers. Now, what have they got to do with the economy? It's just spending a lot of money on getting, not necessarily getting reelected this time, because constitutionally he can't, but setting it up for his political party and trying to get his agenda across, at any rate. One of the things that we always run into is the bias of the newspapers, and sometimes it comes out quite blatantly. And in this case, the New York Times Global Forum. And it's being hosted by one of their Pulitzer Prize-winning columnists, Thomas Friedman. He's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, as are the owners of the New York Times, have almost always been members of the CFR. There are other speakers there who are in the CFR, and they control 18 other newspapers, such as the Boston Globe. But they're going to have a conference on the global situation. Now, the Council on Foreign Relations stands for a one-world government. That is their goal. They have never hidden this. And anybody who goes to their website, reads their publications, etc., knows that that's the case. So they have this global forum. Now, how can you be unbiased in your news and everything else if that is your particular thing that you want to do? You're going to slant everything towards that, to propagandize the reader through the news, through advertising, any number of different things, to get the reader to also want a one-world government. These newspapers are not unbiased. The thing is that we have seen in the past that they've supported and promoted gay marriage. They haven't even endorsed a Republican candidate for president since Dwight David Eisenhower, to give you a general idea. They, in the 1930s, did everything they could to hide the fact that Stalin and the communist government were slaughtering millions of their own people. Instead, we got glowing reports from their reporters about the economic progress that was being made in Russia, and how the serfs and everybody else were now equal and so on, instead of telling about the brutality that everybody knows about today, but not the New York Times back in the 1930s. Another thing that they did was they promoted Castro to replace Batista as the ruler of Cuba. They called him the Abraham Lincoln of the Sierra Maestra Mountains and things of that nature. They sold Castro to the American people and denied he was a communist until finally Castro, in a national broadcast, declared that he was a communist. And then the New York Times said, oh, gee, we didn't notice, we didn't know. Sure they knew, because a lot of people were telling them, they just weren't putting it into the newspaper. These are the sorts of things that happen in some of these major publications. If those are the only things you read and look at, then you can become fooled. So it behooves us to educate ourselves so that we can at least get the news, but we can also read between the lines in the news when we're better educated. Until next week, we'll see you then.